Okay, so picking up with kind of this new reality where we have to work remotely and work on our next assignment, which we had an introduction to before, but it's the vector logo project. Remember, you have all the resources from the assignment sheet. So you have your assignment page, which gives you kind of the one-page breakdown of everything that's expected. We're going to be using some different file formats here. We'll talk about that. And the main difference here is that this is a vector program that we're using instead of a raster program. So we're switching from Photoshop, which deals with pixels, to something that deals with paths and anchors. And then we have my little lecture in Google Slides. We'll let that load. And we have a digital honors student mentorship presentation on logos that you can definitely look at for inspiration for this project. Now, I give a theme for this project, and the theme that we chose was all about Earth Day and sustainability, and the theme we chose was Leave No Trace, Fire and Water. So that's a theme you can choose to use if you like. This was an Earth Day theme I used before. For a previous example, you'll see those examples in PhotoBucket under instructor examples. So there's just lots to look for. And when we turn in our project, we're going to turn in a black and white version first and then a color version. And the most important thing for a logo or graphic symbol that's a vector is that it works well in black and white first. And the best way to think about that is just as a black and white cutout shape. You know, something solid that you could cut out of black paper. And that's going to be the most effective. So let's move on. You are going to have a question of the day that relates to this assignment. And this presentation, basically think of this as my lecture, right? Which starts with this video that you can review and then goes through all of the different differences between raster and vectors. So where can you get to that question of the day, and how will you turn that in, since we're not in class to do it individually? If you go to, let's see, you can't go to assignments. So let's see, go to the home page. I have a new link for you that's called Questions of the Day. I just built these last week, but I built so much I have to remind myself. So if you click on that, you will find our remaining questions of the day, plus the ones that we already covered in class, right? And along with each of them, I give you a link to some resource that will help inform you about them. And then all you have to do is click on it. So the new question of the day that relates to this project is number 3. If you click on that, you'll see the question that I want you to answer. You'll get a link to that same lecture presentation that I want you to go through. Think of it as my lecture. And then you're just going to follow these directions to get credit for it. Remember, your answers to these questions of the day. What advantages does vector-based imagery have over raster-based imagery? What are its disadvantages? When would using a vector-based image be more effective than a pixel-based image? Your answers to that, to get full credit, engagement credit, should be more than 100 words. And you just do that by clicking on reply and starting with your full name. For the ones you've already written, you can actually just attach a photo of what you've already written as well. So you can attach a photo by hitting reply and then using the little paperclip attach option. So we already have one attached here by Monet. All right, so this is being recorded. This will be in the YouTube feed just to remind you how to do questions of the day. If we look back on them, there's just as many required of you, even though we're remote, as there were required before. which isn't that many because it's a studio class, but I will want you to do a midterm self-assessment. I will want you to do, question of the day number 1, number 2, number 3, which is new, number 4 once we get nearer the final project, and then at the end of the semester, the interim self-assessment. So a total of 6 different postings I need from each of you. All right. So number 3 is going to help us further engage and understand this vector stuff, which relates to black outline shapes, but also strokes and paths that surround shapes. And basically, it's the difference between something being really clean and tight and versatile, so it can be scaled up to any resolution, versus being locked into pixels. And so the difference is pretty stark depending on the pixel resolution. You can see the kind of stair-stepping of the pixels here and how rough things can look and how much variety there can be in how the tools are made versus how perfectly clean and even and precise everything as a vector is, no matter what size you're showing it, because it's not based on pixel resolution. So going back to that, if we go to our assignments, we're going to use all the same tools we used to use in terms of posting our work. We're going to use Photo Bucket. We're going to post sketches. We're going to post PNGs of floating work for this assignment. But whenever you're in doubt, you can always go back to the assignment sheet, which is right here. Okay, one big difference is that I don't expect you to have Photoshop and Illustrator on your computer. If you have them, you want to use them, great. You can use our YouTube channel from previous semesters to see examples of this project done with Illustrator and then brought into Photoshop. But for this semester, because we're all working from home on our own devices with whatever we have, we are going to use what is in links. So if we go down to links, I want to remind everyone of the programs we're going to use. So first of all, we're still going to be using our YouTube channel. I'll be posting videos like this there, so you can kind of catch up. And if you're not able to be, in the Zoom meeting with us for class and you just need to review, that's going to be an easier way to review in 15-minute increments. You can still resource images and inspiration through Pixabay. That's a great resource to use. The main raster program we're going to use instead of Photoshop is Photopea. And then the main vector program we're going to use instead of Illustrator is vector.com without the O. So to follow along with me, I want you all to open up all of those in your browser. And then we're going to post to PhotoBucket and so on and so on. All right. So how do we get started on this project? Well, if we were in class, I would say we needed to open up our folder, right? So just like we've been doing in class, we want to create a master folder. And this will be for assignment 6, our vector graphic. So I'm doing this in my own Dropbox. You're responsible for being able to save your work to a reliable place, whether it's your own Dropbox and your own computer, whether it's to a thumb drive and your computer, whatever it might be. So this is what I have sketched and what I am going to be working on. So let me walk you through my sketch process a little bit with fire and water, leave no trace. First of all, realize that for a logo graphic, for a vector graphic, that you want to ultimately be like cutout paper, you really need to simplify it. It needs to work small, and I can still see that bird's head pretty clearly. None of these other approaches work very well at a small size. It has to work really large and clean, right? The problem is here you see all those pixels, so as a vector it would be perfectly clean no matter how large it was. So even though we might have tendencies to have ideas that are pretty detailed, representational, naturalistic, and that's usually my drawing tendency as an illustrator, I try to find inspirations. So this one was from Pixabay. And this is actually a vector image from Pixabay. I actually don't want to open it with Illustrator. You can just see it as it is. But you can search for vector graphics on Pixabay just like you can search for photos and rasters, right? So if we go to Pixabay, we might look up, as it says here, search images, vectors, and videos. So I might search for tire fire, which is kind of an idea I had, and then I looked for reference. And you'll see if I limit them to only vector graphics, which is what we're creating for this project, there's only, 4 examples. But it shows you kind of the different approach. Now here's a vector graphic. It's not a particularly great one, and it's done with 2 tones, a black shape and then a middle gray shape. But what vectors often do, and clip art and those kind of inspiring images can do for you, is show you ways that content has been simplified, and that might help you understand what to do. Now, when you download a vector graphic, notice that it is an SVG file, and that stands for Standard Vector Graphic. The problem with SVG files, and why we don't usually use them, though we will use them this semester, is that they don't go into Photoshop easily. But we will learn about SVG files this semester because that's how we'll save things out of our vector program. And then we are going to bring them into Photoshop, but then scale them up to whatever size we need. And this is the program we're going to use. So if we go to links, it is vector.com. It's a browser-based version of Illustrator, though not as similar to Illustrator as Photopea is similar to Photoshop. And what I say here is you can use this to work on and save layered SVG vector files to work on in and out of class. So it's just that SVG format that's a little limiting. Okay. So how do I go from sketching to actually making a vector? Well, I always recommend finding inspiration. So these are some of the different inspirations I pulled before I started sketching. And then this was my first round of sketching. And notice I really kind of got into the idea of a tire fire tiger for some reason. And so I had a lot of fun drawing this, but notice it got a little too complicated too quickly. And so then I decided, well, what if I changed this dynamic kind of logo treatment into something that was more central and symmetrical? If you remember the 3 kind of main approaches to logo design, you have central symmetrical, you have dynamic, or you have a play of positive and negative space. So the fun thing about sketching for central symmetrical logos is you only have to sketch half of it. And when I sketched half of it, it was able to simplify it somewhat, but it's still getting a little picky in terms of its shapes. And I can show you some of the things I played with there. And then I made one that's even simpler, dealing with water. So this was my first approach to the water, this toxic water dolphin. Kind of think of them as sports mascots, environmental sports mascots. But that's a little bit too illustrative, a little too detailed. That might work well for assignment 7, but not for assignment 6. And so this is my simplified version of that. And ultimately, I worked on them a little bit in the computer. And these are my rough sketches. So for leave no trace, fire and water, I like this for my fire kind of graphic symbol, this for my water graphic symbol, and you only need to do 1 graphic symbol for this assignment, right? But what I like about this is this one is symmetrical, so I'll get to show you that. And this one is not symmetrical, even though it's still kind of a central focus. And so I'll get to show you that. So these are the sketches I'm going to work with. These can be sketched in a sketchbook. You can see how rough these are. These are raster images. You can see the